In the third week of November, 1969, 3 elk hunters were caught by a fast blizzard in the Ruby Range of southwestern Montana, 5 miles from their truck with the light failing and the temperature falling through zero. Gil Hartney, his brother Ray, and their friend Doyle Cash were experienced men, and experienced men in that country and that weather die about as often as green ones, and they knew it. They were feeling their way down a drainage in a whiteout when Doyle walked into a wall. It was a cabin, square-built logs, snow to the sills, and through the one window came the low orange light of a fire. They hammered on the door, got no answer, and let themselves in to live. The stove was burning. The lamp was lit. 3 cots stood made along the wall, and a pot of water sat warm on the stove's edge, and there was no one there at all. Stay with me, because the empty warm cabin is not the mystery. The mystery is what the sheriff's search party found when the hunters led them back to it. The 3 men spent the night grateful and a little uneasy, in the way you are uneasy in someone's home when the someone might return. They fed the stove from a full wood box. They noted, because there was nothing to do but note things, the details of the place. A wall calendar from a Dillon feed store, hanging open to October 1952. A heavy canvas coat on a peg with a name stitched inside the collar, E. Marsh. Traps on the wall, oiled. And on the shelf above the 3rd cot, a silver pocket watch, wound and ticking, engraved on the case, to Everett from Ada, 1948. In the morning the sky was scoured blue, the storm gone, and the hunters did the honest thing, they left $3 on the table for the wood, and Doyle Cash, for reasons he never fully untangled even for himself, picked up the pocket watch and put it in his pocket, telling the brothers they would hand it in at Dillon so the owner would know who had used his cabin. They marked their back trail the whole way out, hatchet blazes and tide flagging, because Gil Hartney was a careful man. At the sheriff's office in Dillon, the name E. Marsh landed like a dropped plate. Everett Marsh was a trapper who had run lines in the Rubies for 20 years, and he was in the county's records because in October of 1952 his cabin had burned in a wind-driven fire, and Everett Marsh had never been seen again. Presumed dead in the fire, though no remains were ever recovered from the ash, which had bothered the coroner of 1952 enough that the file had stayed technically open for 17 years. The sheriff took the pocket watch out of Doyle's hand and drove to Deer Lodge, where Ada Marsh, Everett's widow, was still living. She identified the watch before he finished asking, by the engraving and by a deep scratch across the case back, put there, she said, by a mule named Herman in 1950. She had watched her husband win that watch every night of their marriage. It had been on him, she had always assumed, the day the mountain burned. 2 days later the sheriff, a deputy, and a Forest Service man followed the hunters back up the drainage, along Gil's Blazes, which ran true and unbroken to the spot. And the spot held exactly what the county records said it should hold. A burned foundation. Charred sill log 17 years into rot, a collapsed stone chimney with a lodgepole pine growing up through the firebox, the whole ruin settled under decades of needle fall and that weak snow, which lay over it smooth and unbroken. No cabin. No stove. No cots, no lamp, no calendar. The $3 Gil had left on the table were never found. The snow on the ruin had fallen during the blizzard, the same blizzard the men had slept through, warm, inside it. Here is what they could not explain, and the sheriff's report walks up to it slowly, because there was no fast way. The hunters were interviewed separately and their accounts matched to the smallest furnishing, the calendar's month, the pot on the stove, the mule scratch on the watch, which none of them could have known to invent. They had entered the blizzard with no food and 1 blanket among them and had come out 2 days later warm, fed, and unfrostbitten, in weather that killed a rancher and 40 head of cattle 30 miles south that same night. Men do not survive that night outdoors. They had been indoors. And the indoors they had been inside had burned to the ground in October of 1952, the month on the calendar, the month Everett Marsh's world stopped. The watch was the one thing that had crossed over, and the county did not know what to do with it, so it did what counties do, it logged it into evidence. It is the only item in the Beaverhead County property room listed as recovered from a structure that does not exist. Ada Marsh was offered it and would not take it. She said Everett would want it where it was. Doyle Cash never hunted the rubies again, but Gil Hartney went back once, in the summer of 1970, in daylight and stood on the burned foundation a long time. What brought him down off that mountain quiet, and kept him quiet about it for years, was a thing he finally told his brother. It was the wood box. He had paced out the ruin, and found the char of the old wood box in its corner, and remembered that on the coldest night of 1969, inside a cabin that had been ash since 1952, the box had been full, stacked neat with dry split pine, more wood than 3 freezing men could burn. Somebody had laid that fire in ahead of the storm. Somebody who knew the mountain, and knew the weather, and knew that 17 years after his own cabin burned with him inside it, 3 men were going to come down that drainage in the dark, and need it.